Hello and welcome back to this new episode in our VR Maker Game series, and in this one we're going to take what we've done so far and hook it all together with our game manager. Let's dive right in. If you're like me and love everything to do with gaming, game development and new technologies, then check out my channel. I've got dozens of videos on how to create your own games and the latest in tech. And if you like what you see, why not consider a subscription? Thanks very much and enjoy the video. So the first thing I want to do this week is tidy up the hierarchy. And normally I break up my hierarchy into different sections and I separate it by right clicking and going create just an empty object. Putting some lines here so we can see that it's like a new section. And I'll call this one, let's say, artwork. And then put some more lines in. And then I'll move that to the top. And then I'll put all my artwork under this particular section. So we've got our Enviro block out free. We'll move that up to there. And then I'll duplicate the artwork. Move it up to underneath the Enviro block out. And I'm going to rename this one. So F2. And I'll perhaps call this one lighting. And remove the ones. And I'll move my light under that section. And you can have whatever sections you want to have. And you don't really even need to do this. This is just like a personal preference, and this helps keep the hierarchy clean and organized, and helps me figure out where things are. So I might call this one XR systems. And generally, like, the more important they are, I'll probably put them at the top. So the XR system is quite important, so I'll move the XR rig and XR interaction manager up there. And then the last section I'll make for now is probably the interactive. So I could just duplicate any one of these, call it interactive, move it above our artwork because it's more important, and I'm going to move our gun parent and our target up into our interactive. And I'll probably just tidy some of these up just so they all line up properly, and that's probably really OCD. And you can see already that's much easier to read. You can see that we've got particular sections, and for somebody new that's maybe coming into a project that's not picked it up before, they can instantly look at this and figure out where everything is. So let's create one last one. Let's duplicate our lighting. And we're going to name this one managers. I'm going to take off the one and bump it right to the top. Now we're going to create our game manager. And the game manager, its sole responsibility is, as the name kind of suggests, is to look after everything to do with our game. So we're going to right click in the hierarchy, go to create empty, and we're going to call this one the game manager. And we're going to bump that right to the top. Now, this is just an empty game object, so I'm going to set it at 0. Not that that really matters. It doesn't have like any physical presence in the scene. And then we're going to go to your scripts folder, and we're going to right click and create a new folder in our scripts folder. Keep all the scripts organized. I'm going to call this one managers. Click in there, and then we'll right click and create a new C# script. And we're going to call this the game manager. And when you press enter on this one, you'll see that it changes from a script kind of icon here, and it's going to go and turn into a cog. This is still a script, it's still a C# class. It's just that Unity recognizes this game manager as kind of like a keyword and assigns it a special icon. And we're going to go ahead and drag that onto our game manager, and you can see it's on our game object there. So now that's assigned on our game manager object. Let's go ahead and double click it and open up in Visual Studio. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is to remove the start and update functions. I'm not going to be needing those. So our game manager is going to be responsible for handling a couple of tasks in our game. Mainly what state the game's in, what the player score is, resetting the game, all the functions and controls that are kind of global for our game. So a lot of our scripts, maybe they're going to be trying to communicate with the game manager at some stage to tell the game manager what's going on. And for those scripts, we got a couple of options to link them up to our game manager. We could reference the game manager as like a variable in the classes that we write and drag and drop it in from the inspector. Or we could create a game manager variable in the other classes and then do a find object of type and assign it that way. Or we could use a design pattern, although it's really not much of a design pattern as such, but we could use a Singleton design pattern. The Singletons are really good for manager type objects. You can think of like a manager object or a singleton manager object as like a central common point in the game that we don't want to forget or have multiple versions of. And the reason it's called a singleton is because there will be only one of them. There will only be one game manager existing in our scene. Our game isn't going to be too complicated, so a singleton pattern suits us quite well because we'll be able to access the game manager really easily. But it does go against the solid principles, which kind of guide you on how code should be treated. And one of the solid principles is the single responsibility principle, which in short means that a script shouldn't contain more than what it was originally built for, intended for. It should have one particular purpose. Like your script should do one particular task, but the singleton manager classes often carry out more than one task and do more than one activity through different methods. But for our game, I think it's going to be fine, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to make the game manager a singleton. So to turn this class into a singleton, at the beginning here, we need to create a static variable. We're going to write the static keyword. That's going to be the game manager. And just below there, we're going to create a public static game manager and give this the name of instance. We're going to give it the big I. And then just below there, we're going to open up a curly brace. Let's say get. And open up curly braces, and we want to return an instance. So if you're not sure what the static keyword means, I do have a YouTube tutorial on variables and their access modifiers and stuff like that, and it talks a little bit about the static keyword. But for those of you that are unsure, static means that the static keyword here is essentially saying that this variable of game manager is going to be shared by all instances of the class. So next we need to check and assign our instance variable here in the awake. We'll go down and we'll write awake. I'm going to say if instance equals null. That's saying if there is no game manager in the scene, then the instance will equal this. This game manager will become the instance. Else, if instance is not equal to null, then there's a game manager already in the scene, so we can destroy this game manager. And once that little bit of that logic statement's written, we can say don't destroy on load, and this is going to allow our game manager to persist even if we want to switch scenes at any time. We can just write this. So this is one way of creating a singleton, and there are a couple of other ways of doing it depending on how your game's functioning. All we're doing here is we're creating a static variable which is going to be of the type game manager, which is essentially this class. We're making a variable of this, and we're going to call that instance. And then this is like a property, creating a public static game manager called instance. Get, we're going to assign instance to the value we have static game manager instance above. So this is really just acting as a property. And then in awake, we're checking to see whether we have a game manager in the scene. And if we did, that would be our instance. And if there is no game manager, then this object, this game manager, will become the instance. So that's like saying, if we were loading a scene and there was no game manager in it, then the object, the game manager that we carried on for the previous scene would become the game manager. But if we were to load another scene and it had a game manager in already, then it would destroy this game manager and nothing else would happen. And at the end here, we have a don't destroy on load, just so we can make this carry across different scenes. I don't think we will be for our game, but at least we know that functionality is all built in. So we can tidy all this up a bit. Normally I just put it all on one line. You might not like that. You might, I think for the sake of the tutorial, it was easier to see as it was a second ago. But this just kind of tidies it up. Go ahead, we can remove those because we've only got one. When you've only got one item in your if, you don't need the curly braces, and the same with the else. So this sets up our singleton, and in the upcoming lessons we can look at how we can access this, because next week we're going to be actually sending a score across to the game manager. And when I create singletons, I like to wrap them up in a section in my code, which I can collapse and expand just to make it easier to read if I've got a long code. So you can use something called regions. And to create a region, you can go hashtag region and you give it a name. So we can call this singleton like so. Maybe we want our region to finish. We can just say end region by putting in a hashtag, going end region and saving it. And it may not look like not much has happened there, But you've now got where the region starts, this little minus button. If you click on there, you can collapse that particular area and then go ahead and write your other code. And then if you need to amend your Singleton at any time, you can go ahead and click on that plus. That's going to show you all the code within that block. That just keeps it all kind of neat. Now we've implemented that simple design pattern for our game manager class. We can go ahead and write our first variable. We're going to call this public. It's going to be a public variable, and it's going to be a type float, and it is going to be score. Finish it off with a semicolon. Now, because there is only going to be one score at the moment for our player, it's not like we're going to have different scores for different things. So there's one global player score. We can go ahead and use the static keyword again. So our variable is public, it's static, telling our application there's that variable of, there can only be one of that score variable in memory, and it's of type float. And then we can write our method here, ready for next week. We can say public void player scored, and we probably want to pass it a float, and this could be the target value, because some targets may be easier to hit than others, so the hard ones will have a higher score value. Then we open up our curly braces, and we can say score equals score plus target value. And that's literally it for that little method. That's all we need to write. And actually what we might do next week is turn this into a property, because we don't want other classes to be able to set it. But actually, let's go ahead and do that now, because at the moment this is public. So any class has access to the score. We do want to give classes access to the score, but we only want to be able to give those classes read-only access. So what we could do here is we could change this to a private. We'll remove the static keyword, and we'll create a property. So we'll say public float score, but with a large S. Open up a curly brace, say get, another curly brace, return, then score, but with a small s, which is private here. And then finish it off with a semicolon. So now other classes can ask the game manager what the score is. The game manager will return the score here, but it won't let other classes increment the score or write to the score in any way. Only the game manager has that control. That's probably a better way of doing it, actually. We might change that as time goes on. And that's just an aspect of game development. You know, things evolve, you come up with some better ideas. But I think that makes sense at the moment. So that's the foundation for our score. Quite a simple implementation. And let's jump back into Unity. Have another look at another feature I want to show you on our targets. So I thought it would be quite cool if when you shot the target here, you got some visual feedback, like a little red dot or something on the target that showed you whereabouts you hit it. And maybe that could also influence the score in some way. So let's go ahead and let's add that feature. And to do that, we're going to look to our gun and our gun script. So when we double click on there and open up in Visual Studio. And let's go ahead and have a look at adding that target. The first thing we're going to need is the graphic that we're going to use to show off where we've hit on our target. We're going to write a header here. We're going to call it target hit graphic. That's just going to be of type game object. We can make it private, but we want to see it in the inspector, so it's a serialized field. It's going to be of type game object. See, our game manager's popped up there. Don't want that one. Game object, and that's going to be our hit graphic. So what we want to do here is when we fire our gun and it hits something, it hits our target, which is all controlled in this fire raycast into scene method that we wrote last week. We actually have everything we kind of need already. We know we shot the target. Cool. So once we know we shot the target, what we can do is write another little method that instantiates our hit graphic at our hit point. It's contained in this out hit of our raycast. So we could say create hit graphic on target. It's a long method name, but it explains it quite well what it does. Finish off with your brackets and a semicolon. This method doesn't exist yet, so control full stop and hit enter on generate method. But we do want to pass it parameter. Should have done before I did that, really. And we want to pass it the hit point, so we can say hit dot point. Now this is a vector free, and it's gone red here because our method that's we created down below doesn't have any parameters. So we need to type in a vector free, call this hit location. Then in here, we're going to instantiate our hit graphic. So we could say game object. We'll give this a name of hit marker. Say equals instantiate, and it's our hit graphic. And we want to put it in the hit location. And we'll just say quaternion dot identity for the rotation. That is literally it. All we're going to do is pass a point that we've hit on our target, and we're going to generate a marker or a graphic at that hit point. Go ahead and save that. Let's jump back into Unity. Wait for that to compile. Now here you see it's asking for a hit graphic. So let's go ahead and make that now. Right click in the hierarchy, go to 3D objects. Let's make it a quad. Put it at 0, 0, 0. As you can see, it's massive. We only need it to be tiny, so let's set the scale to be 0.1 by 0.1, and even that's probably a little too big. Let's go ahead and make it 0.5. Go back at 0. Now on this hit graphic, we don't need it to cast any shadows. No, we don't need the mesh collider. We do need to give it material. So go ahead and create a material. Right click, create material. We'll call this hit target locator. Drag it onto our game object. Let's give that quite a better name. It's like hit locator. Let's have a look at this material now. We can give it quite a simple material. Go for unlit. Let's just make it a red square for us out. Let's make this a bit smaller. And that's literally it. And we'll drag this out into our prefabs folder. Locator. And then we can remove it from the scene. And then in our gun parent, back on our gun script, drag the hit locator into our hit graphic. And then save. Let's go ahead and test this out. Shoot. We don't see a target anyway because we haven't actually hit a target yet, but as soon as we aim and fire at the square, you can see we got our little red dot in the right place where we've hit. So that's just something quite cool, which I thought works well in the game. But now, before we finish, I just want to show you kind of how easy it is to kind of access that game manager and increment the score. So if you go and click on the target and double click on the target controller. So this is the target script we wrote, I think it was last week. And then we have this target shot method, which was generated through our interface. So when the target's shot, we just need to tell the game manager the target's been shot and to allocate a score for this target. So this is where you kind of really see the power of the Singleton, I suppose, coming into its own here, because all we need to do is go to GameManager.instance. So what we're doing here, we're accessing here GameManager.instance, which is here in our Singleton. We're accessing this. We're going to get it. .AS scored, and we need, and you see it pops up here. We need to pass a parameter for the target value. So we can say, let's say this create a variable for that. So at the top here, let's go ahead and create a variable to hold how much this target's worth. This can be a serialized field, float type. We're going to call it target score value, and then we can pass it the target score value. Finish off with a semicolon. So that's literally it. That's all we've had to do to tell the game manager that the player scored. And as our game manager gets bigger, what we might want to do is break out that score code and put it in a score manager class. And that score manager class could also be a singleton that we could access in exactly the same way. So rather than game manager, it would be score manager. And then that score manager could communicate with the game manager to let them know what the score was. That'd be another way of doing it. That's something to think about as our game gets bigger, I suppose. So we could see this working if we go back to our game manager. What we could do here is in our player score, let's write a debug log. Just want to see what the score is, so we can go ahead and write score. Semicolon. Let's go ahead back to our game. Let's give our target a score value here in our new variable we've created. Let's say this is worth 100 points. Play. Go back to the console so you can see it. Shoot the target. You see we've got 100 pop up there in the console, and that'll keep adding up and adding up. So here's how the Patreon scene's looking. I've added in killed the microphone. Just added in the targets, 3D models with textures, and also then when you go ahead and shoot, you get your little red X indicating where you've hit the target. You can see I'm a great shot. So there we go. That's been a lot covered in that video. We've tidied up our hierarchy and organized the structure. We've written our game manager, made it a singleton. added our score method so that we can increment the player score when the target is shot, and we've also added in a visual when our target is actually shot by our gun. Next week we're going to go ahead and add some UI and wire up the functionality on our controllers to be able to interact with the UI and then go back to shooting our guns once we've clicked start. If you're enjoying these tutorial series and you're finding them useful, then it'd be really great if you could leave a like on the video. That really help me out. That's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one. See you then.